Released in 1987 for the Nintendo Entertainment System, Top Gun was developed by Konami and quickly became one of the most well-known flight combat games of the 8-bit era. Inspired by the 1986 blockbuster movie Top Gun starring Tom Cruise, the game attempted to bring the intense dogfights and high-speed jet maneuvers of the movie into the world of home consoles. While it was both a financial success and a memorable title for many gamers, Top Gun on the NES was also known for its notorious difficulty and one infamous mission objective: landing the plane. The development was driven by the massive popularity of the movie, which had taken the box office by storm the previous year. Konami, already a prominent developer in the NES era with hits like Castlevania and Contra, sought to capitalize on the Top Gun movie's fame by creating a video game adaptation that could capture the excitement of jet combat. While the movie's fast-paced aerial dogfights were thrilling on the big screen, Konami's challenge was to translate that action to the limited hardware of the NES. The development team focused on creating a semi-realistic flight simulation experience, one that would immerse players in the cockpit of an F-14 Tomcat, the legendary jet featured in the movie. Using a combination of 2D graphics, rudimentary 3D elements, and a first-person perspective, Konami created a game that, while not visually stunning by modern standards, stood out at the time for its attempt to simulate aerial combat. A soundtrack inspired by the movie's iconic music added to the game's appeal, even though it couldn't directly use licensed tracks. The development team worked to incorporate familiar elements from the movie while still delivering a gameplay experience that could stand on its own as a challenging and rewarding flight simulator. Top Gun for the NES doesn't follow a detailed narrative like the movie it's based on, but instead offers a straightforward military setting. The player assumes the role of an anonymous pilot in the U.S. Navy, flying the F-14 Tomcat on a series of missions against enemy forces. The game's plot unfolds through a series of 4 missions, each progressively more challenging than the last, culminating in a climactic final mission. The missions don't have a deep story or detailed plot points, but each one is introduced with a briefing screen that provides basic objectives, such as destroying enemy bases, sinking battleships, or engaging in aerial dogfights. There's a vague sense of progressing through a warlike campaign, with the player facing increasing resistance as they advance. What the game lacks in narrative depth, it makes up for with the tense atmosphere of each mission. Players must battle waves of enemy jets, dodge missiles, and take out strategic targets, creating a feeling of being a lone pilot deep behind enemy lines. The lack of specific characters or storyline didn't detract from the experience, as the game was focused more on replicating the adrenaline of aerial combat than telling a complex story. Top Gun is a first-person flight combat simulator, a rare choice for NES games of the time, as most opted for side-scrolling or top-down perspectives. The game's mechanics are straightforward, but it challenges players to master the controls and timing necessary to complete each mission. The game is divided into 4 missions, each requiring players to complete a series of objectives while engaging enemy aircraft. Missions range from destroying enemy bases to sinking naval ships, with each mission increasing in difficulty. Each mission ends with the player needing to land the F-14 on an aircraft carrier, an infamously challenging task. Unlike many other games of the era, it utilizes a first-person cockpit view, giving players a sense of immersion as they pilot the F-14. The cockpit displays include speed, altitude, fuel, and missile count, all of which are critical to mission success. Players have access to a machine gun and a limited supply of missiles. 3 types of missiles are available: standard, medium range, and long range, with each offering varying degrees of power and range. Managing ammo is crucial, as running out of missiles during a dogfight leaves the player relying solely on the slower-firing machine gun. The game is famous for its mid-mission refueling and aircraft carrier landings, which require precise timing and control. To refuel, players must align their jet with a refueling aircraft, a difficult task that involves carefully adjusting speed and altitude. Landing on the aircraft carrier at the end of each mission is notoriously hard, with many players struggling to line up the perfect approach. The game features a mix of enemy fighters, ground targets, and naval threats. Enemy AI is simple but relentless, forcing players to dodge incoming missiles and position themselves for precise shots. The game's difficulty is a significant part of its legacy, with each mission requiring careful planning and quick reflexes to survive. Top Gun features a catchy soundtrack that draws inspiration from the movie, despite not having the official score. The sound design includes beeping alerts, missile fire, and the roar of jet engines, all contributing to the atmosphere of intense air combat. One of the most infamous aspects is the landing sequence that ends each mission. Many players found this part of the game to be frustratingly difficult, as the margin for error was extremely small. Aligning the plane's speed, altitude, and direction perfectly was challenging, leading to many crash landings and game overs. It's a sequence that has become a symbol of the game's difficulty, sparking countless stories among players who struggled to get it right. Top Gun on the NES was partly inspired by earlier arcade flight simulators like Afterburner, which had been popular in the mid-1880s. Although the game lacked the graphical power of an arcade machine, it tried to capture the same high-speed thrills with its first-person perspective and intense dogfights. One of the unique gameplay features was the ability to choose from 3 different missile types before each mission: T-11 H standard missiles, T-22M medium-range missiles, and T-33L long-range missiles. Each type of missile offered a different tactical advantage, adding a layer of strategy to the game that was rare for its time. Top Gun was a massive hit as a rental title in the late 1980s and early 1990s, partly because it was based on such a popular movie and because many players wanted to take on the game's infamous challenges. It was one of those games that every NES owner seemed to try at least once, even if they never managed to finish it. Due to the success of the first game, Konami developed a sequel called Top Gun: The Second Mission in 1990. The sequel added new features, more advanced graphics, and multiplayer dogfights, cementing Top Gun's place as a notable NES franchise. The original game's difficulty and iconic moments have left a lasting impression, often being featured in retrospectives on challenging NES games. Though it did not feature characters from the movie or tell a detailed story, the game maintained a strong connection to the movie's spirit. The intense action, dramatic flight sequences, and military setting made it a fitting tribute to the movie, despite the limitations of 8-bit technology. Top Gun for the NES is a game that has lived on in both admiration and infamy. For many players, it was their first experience with a flight combat game, and its simple yet challenging gameplay provided an accessible entry point to the genre. The game's notorious difficulty, especially the landing sequences, has become a part of gaming culture, often referenced in discussions of challenging games from the 8-bit era. Despite the lack of sophisticated graphics or a deep story, Top Gun was a technical achievement for the NES, pushing the limits of what the console could do with a first-person perspective and semi-realistic flight simulation. Its success paved the way for other flight combat games, and it remains a nostalgic favorite for those who grew up with the NES. The game's connection to the movie helped cement it in the minds of players, even those who never mastered its landing sequences. It's a game that continues to be discussed, dissected, and remembered as one of the most challenging and rewarding experiences on the NES. Top Gun for the NES is a game that both captivated and frustrated a generation of gamers. Its challenging gameplay, unique use of the first-person perspective, and connection to one of the biggest movies of the 1980s made it a memorable title in the NES library. While it may not have aged as gracefully as some of its peers, it remains a fascinating part of gaming history, a testament to Konami's ambition and the enduring appeal of high-flying adventure. Whether you were among the few who mastered the infamous landings or one of the many who crashed into the ocean, Top Gun left a mark that still resonates in the world of retro gaming.